Hello Facebook Live, welcome to the Henry Holster shop again. It is another night of discussion of design and all kinds of fun stuff. I have a few things to do before we actually really get rolling here, so bear with me and I'll get situated here. I have a new microphone for the broadcast tonight, so hopefully that will mean better audio quality for the whole evening. That's the goal. I am going to be running the mill tonight, so I will occasionally have to pop the mic off and step away from the camera just momentarily to put some fresh stock in the machine and keep it running, because I got parts I have to deliver tomorrow that I need to keep running. So hello, Mike. Thank you for dropping by. I got myself a fancy new lapel microphone. Hopefully that will mean better audio quality for the whole broadcast and less of the peaking and then volume dropping when I move back. Hello, Todd. No, Connor, no baby yet. Still waiting. All right, are you guys getting this mic? Can you hear me clearly with the lapel mic that I'm wearing? Go ahead and sound off and let me know how the audio is. I do have a fan running, and if I need to, I can turn it off. So, if you just joined in, please like the post, throw up a comment, let me know you're here, and also share the post and invite anybody else that you think would be interested in the topic. We're going to talk outside the waistband holsters. I have some questions to answer about trim molds. I also got a bunch of hardware from RC Holster Supply, and I'll tell you guys what I think of that now that I've had a chance to test it out a bit. Loud and clear. Great. I hope that this will prove to be a worthwhile investment in terms of clearing up the audio, because what I heard on previous broadcasts was that when I got close to the camera to look at comments, you could hear me very clearly, and then when I backed off more, it was much harder to hear. Hello, Tom. Hello, Dan Taylor. If you are a Kydex company, you work in the holster industry, please tag your company name in your comment along with your personal name so that I can see who's who, because I have a hard time keeping track of all the different companies. Let me try getting rid of that light. Nope, too dark. Split the difference. There we go. That way I don't look quite so horrendously pale. So thank you all for joining me. It's been a busy week here in the shop. I've been running a lot of these parts. Hard to see exactly what this is. This is a helmet adapter to put Peltors on a ballistic helmet. I make these for another Indiana-based company, M-Tech Weapon Systems, and so they've been really busy since the whole Team Wendy, Hillary Clinton thing. So that means I've been really busy. Lots of extra machine parts to make. Holsters. Tony Katner is here. Alameda Holsters is here. Oh boy. Welcome, Tony. Welcome, Tony. Welcome any other Tonys who happen to be here. Pagan Ridge Tactical. Hello, Pagan Ridge. Thank you for stopping by. So we'll take a few more minutes before we get all the way into the outside the waistband holster discussion. I wanted to answer some questions I got on social media about trim molds real quick, and then we'll get to the holster questions. So Riley sent me a question through Facebook asking if trim molds can be used as forming molds. Hello, Harrison. I'm glad to see you're enjoying those HDPE molds. So this is a trim mold, and there are a few important things about the way I do trim molds. Not everybody does trim molds this way, but this is how I do them. First of all, a trim mold is defeatured. It does not have all the details of a forming mold because it doesn't need to. It's not shaping the plastic, it's just serving as a guide for a router bit to run around the edge. So there's no point wasting extra time machining lots of fine details if the trim mold isn't going to form those details. So you can see here on the face of this mold, the whole attachment area is just flattened out. There's nothing machined there because I don't need it. The other thing is that trim molds have a 90-degree face. There's no draft angle on them at all because you want the bit, if there was a draft angle on this edge, as you change the height of your router bit, it would actually cut further in or further out from the part depending on what height on that angle the bearing was riding against the mold. That's no good. So these have 90-degree sides, which means two things. If you're using this as a forming mold, it will be very hard, or much harder, not impossible, but harder, to demold the plastic because the Kydex will bite really hard onto these corners and suck in tight on those vertical faces, which means you'll have a lot more work to do to get the mold out of the shell, which just costs you time. And part of the point of this kind of machined molds and trim molds is to save time. And then the other thing is, if you're going to trim with a router, you don't want the plastic running vertically. You don't want to be cutting through a piece of .080 that's diving straight down this edge. And if you form the Kydex so that the edge of the trim mold, the exact no margin final dimension of the shell, is the hard corner of that mold, it will be very hard to pre-cut it without accidentally cutting inside that barrier, cutting inside that line and ruining the shell. But you'll also have too much plastic there on the edge. It will wrap over, and when you trim it with the router bit, even though the router bit's supposed to cut tight to the edge, you will get some feathering of plastic that hangs down over that edge that you'll still have to clean up later. So overall, trim molds and forming molds are just different animals. They don't cross over. They're not intended to. So hopefully, Riley, that answers your question. If you have other questions, please let me know. Hello, Eric Powell. Thank you for stopping by. In every other way, though, my trim molds are an analog to the forming mold. The slide dimensions, the trigger guard indentation, all that's the same, so that when I register the shell on the mold, I'm not only relying on a couple of screws to hold it down and to locate it. The full contour of the holster shell locates the shell on the mold, and then the threaded inserts and screws just hold it down and keep it from chattering when I'm cutting with the router bit. So I know some guys who are doing flat plate trim templates, like I think Todd May's doing those. He doesn't have the same level of contact between the shell and the trim mold, and there are ways of working around that and overcoming it and still getting great shells off. For security's sake, so I can go fast when I'm trimming, as fast as is safe, I prefer to have all the contours machined in and have the shell nest onto that mold. So that's the difference between trim molds and forming molds. Hope that helps. RC Holster Supply. I had a phone conversation today with Charlie from RC Holster Supply about the bag of hardware he'd sent me after one of my previous videos that was on hardware and attachments. He reached out to me through Instagram and asked if I'd ever checked out his products. I told him I hadn't, so he offered to send me some as samples to investigate. I told him I'd be happy to look at them. He sent them, I went over them, and gave him some feedback. I wanted to share a few things with you. I don't have everything here that he sent me. A few things are still scattered on one of the benches back there. But he sent me a selection of tuckable overhooks, some closed outside the waistband loops with tabs, undrilled. I think these are the ones the guys call 90-10 loops. RC Holster Supply's pancake wings, a pair of their tuckable struts, a couple of their rigid spacer options, both the singles, doubles, and triples, and then their wide, non-tuckable overhook, similar to a foamy or DIY quick clip. And overall, I thought the quality of most of the hardware was fine. Hi, Rick Wayne. Is that a Goonies reference? Out there, it's their time. But in here, guys, in here, it's our time. Our time. I asked about the plastic blend, and Charlie said it's proprietary nylon 6/6. The parts feel flexible but sturdy. One of my concerns was mostly cosmetic, and if you will know that there is a parting line, a mold line, with some flashing on the face of the parts. I'll see if I can get that up there so you guys can see that line on the face. I wasn't real happy with that cosmetically. It looked to me like the part wasn't fully refined, and we discussed it, and he explained that the reason that's there is because there are draft angles on the part. If you look at the end profile of the part, it's not completely square. It tapers up to that line on the face of the part from both sides, because he wanted to be able to demold them without scratching up or marring the surface of the part at all, which makes total sense. Injection molding is its own science. Cosmetically, I'm still not thrilled with it, but if it allows him to make more consistent parts with less surface issues, then it is what it is. We'll get back to these 90-10 loops when we talk about outside the waistband pancake holster design and curve jigs, vacuum forming, splitting molds, doing 50-50s, 60-40s, 90-10s, all that stuff. But I was very glad that Charlie sent the stuff over, and I did spend some time wearing the large tuckable overhook. I found it to be a little bit more flexible than I would like, but I also did really like the hook geometry. It's very aggressive and really got under the belt. Hi, Luke Trout. I'm glad you could make it. Thank you for stopping by. Let me know what you think of the audio. And so if you use RC Holster Supply, I like the stuff. I'm probably not going to switch over to using any of it because most of my designs are already built with specific hardware choices in mind. And changing hardware for me means changing designs, which means redoing CAD and redoing CAM and remachining molds, and it's a whole big ball of wax for me. So that's the rundown on RC Holster Supply. One distinctive feature is, and this is less the case now that companies like IFI have started onshoring more of their molds, but everything RC Holster Supply has is molded in the US. So RC Holster Supply, and Charlie has a wide range of products. Check them out and give them a try. So audio is great. I removed a human brain today. This guy is not exactly a brain surgeon, but he's close. Luke Trout is in dental school, so he's been having fun at the cadaver lab, which sounds a little bit too hands-on for me, honestly. So the main topic tonight is outside the waistband holster design and production methods. And I touched on some of these concepts in the hardware and attachments video because different hardware influences design and design requires certain hardware choices. But I wanted to just take a step back a couple of years and show you one of my old pancake holsters and then talk about design elements in it, how it was produced, what has changed in my process, what kind of changes I've seen with outside the waistband holsters generally in the holster industry, and what I think are the advantages and disadvantages of those changes. So one of the first ones is, here is one of my old holsters. This is vacuum formed on an old BLT, Blue Light Tactical membrane vacuum former. This is built on a DIY drone of a Glock 34 with X300 Ultra A that I split 60-40 in-house on my bandsaw, and then also did a little bit of CNC machining too on my router. You can see that the light channel up here is flat. The stock DIY drone comes with a hump there, and overall I found the light channel to just be too oversized. It was bigger than I needed, and it made the holster harder to conceal. So I actually split my mold and then machined both sides to create a new flat there and tighten the dimension on that light through channel. It's a very functional holster. It has a nice click. It has non-adjustable retention, and it uses standard holster loops outside the waistband, what are called open outside the waistband loops, which are my standard loop on most holsters still today. Although I use far more of the 1.5" than the 1 3/4 version. So, a few design elements that are built into this. Obviously, for light bearing, you have to have a light channel, and you want the light channel to be big enough that you can get the bezel in without snagging, dragging, or catching. But you don't want it so oversized that it's easy to get a finger, a shirt tail, any other kind of stuff in there. And so different holster makers have different ideas about how much relief should be cut into the light channel here. I err on the side of more coverage rather than more clearance, because you can always take plastic away later, you can never add it. And for most carry applications, even a little bit of rubbing there is not actually a problem. What you find is that if you're going to go out and go training, if you're going to go do a whole day of training where you're going to go through 600 or 700 rounds, and you're going to do hundreds of draw strokes, that's where a small amount of contact will actually start to bite you. But it's because of the repetitions. And so for everyday carry and actual defensive use, I err on the side of a little more coverage rather than a little more clearance. And the end user, if they want to, can always take a Dremel and take a little material off there and sand it up and clean it up if they so choose. For my holsters, that won't void the warranty. I used to joke that the only thing I don't warranty is acetylene torch cutting. So if you send a holster back to me and you've obviously sectioned it up with a welding torch, I'm not going to warranty it. Almost anything short of that, I'll warranty. And so, being membrane formed, this was before I built my first Swift press. There's some draping off the sides, and that controls how close in I can set the eyelets and controls something of the overall width of my holster. For outside the waistband pancakes, generally narrower is better. We've all seen, pancake holsters that were 10 inches wide. Some of us have made them. I know some of my first pancake holsters were unreasonably wide. And sometimes that was just because you didn't know any better and didn't think real carefully about the layout of your eyelets and the pattern of the holster. In other cases, holsters are overly wide because the molding is not good. In some cases, the molding is too tight, too heavy, and the only way that the user can get the holster maker can get the gun in and out is to space the eyelets far from the holster, so there's lots of material between that pinch point and that flex point for the plastic to move so the gun can come in and out. It's sometimes wide holsters are a way of overcoming shoddy workmanship. If you've recently joined up, please like the video, throw up a comment. If you're a holster maker, please add your company name so I know who you are. And then also share the video to your page and invite anybody else who you think would be interested by it. Any other holster makers, any other shooters, competitors, anybody else you think would be interested, anybody who carries outside the waistband and would be interested in finding out more about the nuances and design features of these holsters. When I made the switch into membrane-free, non-membrane vacuum forming, doors started opening in terms of design because I had more control over the shape. I could actually make the blocking more specific and really draw down tight on it. I could size the light channel very precisely and really draw down tightly on it. And I could put drill indicators in the wing, and I could angle the wings and form those very precisely and skip the whole secondary heating and then bending of the wing step. That topic by itself has been widely discussed on forums, how best to get crisp wing angle bends if you're forming the holster flat and then having to heat with a heat gun and bend your wing angle. Bending wing angles, though, does have a utility to it. And one of the things is, one of the advantages of molding with flat wings and then bending in post is that you can customize the wing angle to a specific user. That's more useful for custom appointments where the person is actually physically in your shop and can try the holster on, and then you can adjust the wing angles. And even if you mold the wing angles in, if you use machined molds with built-in wing angles, or you use Red-Eye Tacticals outside the waistband mold backers that have a matched front and back, that doesn't prevent you from heating the wing and adjusting the bend, making it less or more depending on the client's needs. But it's always kind of a shame to form it with a nice crisp wing angle and then heat that up and change it. And so there are a few tricks with wing angles to improve concealment and keep the overall size of the holster small. Generally, I put the eyelets as close to the body of the holster as I can. The main test for me is a pinky test. I just simulate a thick belt. If I can get my finger through that whole loop, I know I've got enough clearance. It's almost never a problem on the slide side, although it is possible to curve that wing so steeply that a belt dives straight into the back and can't make that corner. It's more of an issue, especially on light bearing, on the light channel side, just because of the thickness there. So I know if I can get a pinky through there on each side, that I've got clearance for thick belts and it'll work just fine. Since there are so many different outside the waistband loop options, even if your design has very steep wing angles, you can use hardware that allows the belt to basically run straight across the back. These are the trapezoidal or angled outside the waistband loops. IFI has them. Don't think DIY does have them. NSR Tactical sells them. Raven Concealment has had them for a long time. There are a couple of ways of doing that. Some guys even use outside the waistband soft loops. You can have them with 2 snaps over the top, the way RCS does theirs, or some guys like Darkstar Gear just do a screw post attached, non-quick snap release, soft loop material outside the waistband loop. So there are tons of ways to skin this cat. Where I have come down on my own designs, what my personal preference is, I prefer to have integrated wing angles that are asymmetrical. I know what my total included angle is, but I don't split it evenly on each side of the holster. I'm looking for a total included angle of about 40 degrees. That's where I'm comfortable. Some holster makers go steeper, some a little shallower. It depends. I'm a skinny guy. If I go shallower, the holster floats in the front corners off the front and back of my hip and doesn't conceal well. So about 40 degrees is what I mold into my holsters, and I put usually about 12 to 15 degrees on this wing and all the rest on the front. So the front is angled more steeply, and the back, the grip side, is a shallower angle. The effect of that is, because that clip isn't rotated in toward the body as far, when the belt pulls on it, it rotates the overall holster body, which brings the grip of the gun in tighter to my side and improves concealment. This holster is a 60-40. I split this one myself. On my own CNC machined molds from my outside the waistband holsters, I don't machine them 50-50. I machine mine 60-40. For most of my customers who I make outside the waistband molds for, they want 50-50s. And that's just because that's what they're used to, that's what their hardware supports, and it doesn't make that big of a difference as long as the total package of your molding and your attachment and your hardware work together to allow the holster to ride close to the body and allow thick belts to pass through. It doesn't really matter. However, once you get all the way up to 80-20 or 90-10, there start to be some other trade-offs, in my opinion, that I think are not worth it. The big advantage of 90-10 is a production advantage, primarily, in my view. Guys do 90-10 holsters because they can form them using a complete drone and a curve jig on a membrane former. So you can take any drone you would also use in a book press or in a coffee bum press, and you can just lay Kydex, gun, Kydex, close your membrane former, suck it all down on a curved jig, and get a pretty presentable outside the waistband holster. What I'm not a big fan about that process is twofold. I don't like the look of the continuous curve. That's an aesthetic preference on my part. I don't think it looks crisp. I don't like that continuous blended curve look. I like angles where the holster is flat and the wings are angled, and you can see the angles, and it reads with clean lines that are parallel to the slide corner and the light channel blocking and the front sight blocking. I like all those lines working together. I'm kind of a snob when it comes to holster aesthetics. The other trade-off is that if you put almost all of the impression, almost all the thickness of the gun in the outside plate and very little on the inside plate, you start running into hardware challenges, attachment problems, because most of the outside waistband hardware on the market has been designed with 50-50 splits as the norm, which means if you take a clip that's that tall, designed to work for a 50-50, and you put it on a 90-10, obviously it stands too tall. When the belt is run through, the holster runs too far off the body and you get a gap, which means the whole package is further out and concealment suffers. It's not good. And so there's been demand, and now supply has been catching up to demand, like RC Holster Supply, by making a much more shallow, not very tall outside the waistband loop that can be used effectively in a 90-10 configuration without having the holster fly really far off the body. I'm not sure if everything is still good on my feed. It's been a while since I've seen any comments come through. It may just be that I'm boring the life out of all of you and nobody has comments. Yeah, that Rick Wayne says that's it. Well, I'm sorry. I'm just not bringing the fire tonight apparently, because nobody's saying anything. If you have questions, I want to answer questions. I'd love to hear what you think. If I mentioned anything and was not clear, let me know. So please, let me know how I can make this of more value to you by telling you what you want to know. Otherwise, I'll just ramble for a while. If the impression of the holster is all in the front, it prints about the same way as a taco would. And what I mean by that is a garment that drapes over the holster. If there's a big chunk in the middle, the garment can drape in on the outsides, and you get that bulge through the shirt. One of the goals of an outside the waistband pancake holster, by having this wing material off the sides, is to make a more regular shape that the garment sweeps over, that doesn't look like a big lump, that doesn't print like a gun. 50-50s do that very well. 60-40s do it almost as well. 90-10s don't do it as well because you drop very sharply off the side and the wing is so close to the body that the garment doesn't wrap over it, it just drops into that gap. It's hard to explain. I feel like I'm not doing a good job explaining how that works. But I find 90-10s, when I've done full gun outside the waistband with a drone on my membrane former, I found those did not conceal as well for me. But it is also a question of how high you wear it, which particular belt loops you use, what kind of clothes you wear, and how you're built. I have a hard time concealing outside the waistband because I'm a skinny guy. I'm so narrow front to back that the holster basically takes up all that front to back real estate and the grip sticks out the back. So it doesn't work for me. That's why I carry appendix. It's one of the reasons I carry appendix. So if it works for you, great. If you're a holster maker and you use a curved jig and you're happy with the results and your customers are happy, great. Speaking of curved jigs, I just saw last night on Instagram that Vic and HD Industrial Designs were posting a whole bunch of photos of their new production injection molded curved jig, which has a nice flat area for your grip to rest on. It's got built-in Velcro strips so you can slap your high temp foam on there and not have it rotate and shift around. So that looked to me like a great improvement over their previous versions of that, which were CNC machined out of wood or plastic. and it has vacuum channels on the bottom to help air move to the central port and get out, which is all good design work. It looks like it was well executed. So props to HD. That's good work. I'm excited to see new tooling, better production methods. It's an improvement. It helps everybody all around. Other things on outside the waistband holsters, closed muzzle versus open muzzle. I make molds for clients who come down on both sides of that. I like open muzzles for a couple of reasons. I don't like stuff to be able to get into the holster and get stuck there. And I also want my holsters to be as cross-compatible as possible with guns of the same family but different slide lengths. And so this holster is closed. So this will fit up to a 34 length, but it won't fit any of the stupid long ones, which nobody carries anyway, as far as I know. I've never made a holster for somebody carrying one of the stupid long ones, 17L. So it hasn't been an issue. But I like that if you're training, which you should do, and you get stuff in that holster, if the muzzle is fully or partially open, junk can pass through and not get snagged up in there and cause problems. I prefer, anytime I make a light bearing holster, I always mold the muzzle of the gun as at least as long as the bezel of the light. There's no point in molding a 19 length gun with an X300 Ultra because you have restricted options and offered limited compatibility with no upside. I don't know if it was a year or so, at least a year ago, that RCS had a fire sale and got rid of all their remaining inventory of 19s with longer weapon lights because they were redundant. That same holster in a 17 configuration will also fit the 19, and so they had extra inventory that had no benefit aside from being more limited in compatibility. So they fire saled them, got rid of them, and stopped making them. Good decision, RCS. That's a wise business move. Outside the waistband holsters can be made with trim molds. There's no reason they can't. They're a little more time consuming because you have to trim front and back plates separately, but it's very doable. And light bearing outside the waistband pancakes can also be cut on trim molds, where you run into a little bit of a challenge and you'll still have probably a little more edge dressing work on a pancake than on a taco, is because you're going to have to drill the front and back plates separately. And even if the mold has indicator pins, if you drill it and put brad nails in, you have some way of marking those locations. Even if they're marked, if you're hand drilling both sides and then lining them up, you will probably end up with some very slight misalignment issues at the very edge. And so you may have to touch up the edges real quickly. It'll be slight, but you may have to touch up the edges on a drum sander or a belt sander before you buff if you're using outside the waistband trim molds to cut your front and back plates before you line them up. One way around that is, when I freehand cut on outside the waistband, I form my front and back. I cut my top front and my top back, and then I line everything up. I drill them together. I eyelet them together, and then I cut the bottom with both halves together, and then polish that, polish the top front and back, then set all my eyelets, and only then do I cut the excess off the wings, then sand and buff, so that those edges on the outside where you really want that nice, clean, full gloss edge, that's eyeleted, then cut, sanded as one unit, and then polished out. I like the way that looks. That workflow has worked well for me for a long time. And so whenever I'm doing outside the waistband holsters that I don't have trim molds for, that's how I do it. Compressor recycling. I'm going to put some fresh stock in the mill and go ahead and run that. If you have questions, post them up. I will be right back. Don't go away. So I'm curious to know, now that I'm using a lapel mic, how loudly you guys hear the compressor cycling and the mill running and other stuff in the shop. I would like to know, for future reference, if you find those sounds bothersome, so that I can know how much stuff I can actually run in the shop while I'm doing this without driving my viewers totally crazy. So if you would, let me know. As stuff runs, you'll hear the compressor again, you'll hear the mill. Let me know how that sounds over this mic, and if you'd like me to turn it off. So thank you for stopping by. It's been kind of a crazy week. I lost track of what day it was. It is only Wednesday. I was thinking it was Thursday. And right now I'm just adding some stock to a small fixture to go back in the mill. These are 15-minute cycle times on these sets of 3 parts, which for me, on my brother mill, is long. Most of my cycle times are under 2 minutes. So usually I have to stand right by the mill and just constantly be feeding it. So this is nice to be able to have 15 minutes during the cycle to sit down and talk with you before I have to take a break and load the next thing up. So other features on outside the waistband holsters. Adjustable retention. This is one where there are differences of opinion on outside the waistband holsters. And right now I'm only talking about pancakes. Outside the waistband tacos are a separate thing, which I'll get to in just a minute. On outside the waistband pancake holsters, on my holsters, I do not offer adjustable retention. On most of my clients' holsters, they do offer adjustable retention, and it's especially important on things like the X300 Ultra A and B model molds that I make, because even though at first glance they look the same, aside from the latching, there are actually a lot of small differences, a lot of small feature changes between the A and B models of the Surefire X300 Ultra, which means that even though you can get acceptable retention on both of them off the same holster, you may need to be able to adjust it in order to get optimal retention. And so on that holster especially, I recommend that customers, my clients who are buying molds, get it with adjustable retention built in. On holsters that are built for one single kind of light, it's not as big of a deal. And the changes in how we form these holsters, going from foam pressing to membrane forming to non-membrane forming, also changes in principle which parts of the rig we actually lock onto for our retention in outside the waistband stuff. So it used to be, when I was foam pressing, it was really hard to get certain lights to click because you just couldn't get the foam, like the APL. I never got an APL to click when I was foam pressing, or even really when I was membrane forming. Now that I'm non-membrane forming, I can get a much crisper lock, even on the APL, because I can drive the plastic into that notch on the underside of the light. When the gun is upright, there's a notch on the underside of the light. When the gun's sideways, you can tuck the Kydex into that notch and get good retention there. Same thing on the TLR1. Because there's no necked down area behind the bezel like there is on the Surefire X300, 300 Ultra, and 400 lights, you can't mold retention around the back edge of the bezel, so you have to mold it on that little cutout on the underside of the TLR1. You can't do it on the TLR2 though, because that stupid laser module fills in all that space on the underside of the light. And so for TLR2 outside the waistband molds, basically you're working with a friction fit. Even when I'm doing CNC machine molds, it's more of a slide into home. You know, you get friction in the last half inch rather than having it go click like we would like. Outside the waistband taco holsters are a separate thing, and I think done with varying degrees of success. Generally, I don't look at outside the waistband taco molds as a good concealment solution, just because they tend to be blocky and the garment won't drape over them, but also because in most cases
they require putting the attachment hardware in between the user's body and the gun. So you're actually stacking more things up, where a pancake puts the attachments off to the side so that you have gun and then the belt directly behind it, and you don't have the additional thickness of the attachments. Some outside the waistband taco holsters, guys, are using a pair of pancake wings that sort of offset it, or are using Tony at Multi-Holsters Speed Ease clips. I guess. I'm just not a big fan of outside the waistband taco holsters for a conceal carry application. There are other things they're great for. I really do like the G-Code RTI system. Safariland also has some great hardware attachments. Blackhawk and Blade Tech have some good hardware attachment systems that can be easily used with an outside the waistband taco. If you want to put it on a battle belt, if you want to put it on a drop leg rig, all those things work great. And if you're shooting competition and concealment is not an issue, and you want to drop offset so you have the gun grip angled out away from your body so you've got tons of room to get your grip and get a nice, clean, fast draw stroke, outside the waistband tacos are great for that. For competition, you actually usually don't want the holster too close to your body because it can slow you down. But for concealment, for outside the waistband carry, most taco holsters that I've seen do not provide the same level of concealment that a well-designed pancake holster will produce. But they also, pancake holsters are usually more time-consuming to produce and use more material and require more hardware. And so if you're in an open carry state and you want to open carry an outside the waistband taco holster with active retention, may be a great option for you. As far as forming outside the waistband taco holsters, it's completely the same as forming inside the waistband taco holsters. You form your shell, trim your shell, fold your shell, put your hardware on, and you're done. Are there any questions you guys have about outside the waistband CNC molds, outside the waistband trim molds, or working with vacuum forming for outside the waistband molds? If not, I'm going to close it up here in just a couple minutes because I got to run a bunch more of these parts, and I've got parts that have to go on the router still tonight, and I'm also just tired. It's been a long week. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to show you. I've been very pleased with how my new outside the waistband holsters are turning out. In the past year, I've redesigned basically everything I've offered as I've gradually worked through new molds that are made on the Brother Mill. And the precision and quality of the molds has been really exciting to make, really exciting to see the finished product off them. And I think we're going to see more companies working toward making or buying dedicated outside the waistband molds with integrated wing angles. Using Red Eye Tactical's outside the waistband backers, which he came up with the concept and I do the machining on. That's a very low cost way to experiment with integrated wing angles and see if you like the workflow. It does make drilling them a little trickier and lining up your halves a little trickier, but the trade-off is it saves time because you skip the whole heating and bending step. So that's it for me for tonight for outside the waistband holsters. A little shorter video than usual. The last ones have been about 90 minutes. I'm trying to keep this one a little bit shorter. Let me know if you like the length, if you want them longer. I'm open to doing either or in the future. And probably sometime in the next week, I'm going to disappear for a few days. Got some family stuff happening. Kid number 4 is due to arrive this week. So exciting times at Henry Holsters. I'll probably be taking some time away from the shop when all that hits so that I can spend time with my family, more time with my family. And then I'll pick up hopefully sometime next week with a video about trim routing shells and also some live question and answer on the Swift press process. So thank you for stopping by. I appreciate you spending your time and giving me your attention. It means a lot to me. So thank you and carry safe. Have a good night, guys.